So now we're into part B, and this section will cover culture and institutions and how they work, in particular the family, and then in the next part we'll look at the education, school and workplace as institutions of socialisation. So that should feed into your interviews. But before I did that, I just edited and put up the first part of the lectures, and it just struck me there was a couple of things that I said that I wanted to... We'll come back to this, but I talked about the implications of the 100 pounds of cotton in terms of time and effort, but I didn't make the connection clearly, I think, to what is the impact on the natural environment. And think about what happens when 100 pounds of cotton is a lifetime's worth of cotton, when it's 2 weeks worth of cotton for one machine, and you've got hundreds of these machines. Well, the nature of agriculture changes. Nature becomes a resource then that you're using to feed the machines. So you need to be more productive, and those productive chains need to be longer and better organised. And in fact, they became global. And gradually over time you see the rise of industrial agriculture with machines doing much more of the cropping and less human labour involved. And you can see that in Baraka if you watch that excerpt from the website. So we'll deal with class more under structure next week, but I wanted to just flag that capitalism isn't about machines. And so I think in that lecture, because I was talking about technology, I gave the impression that, that capitalism is about certain kinds of machines, whereas the sociologist, capitalism is about certain sort of social relationships around those machines. So what changed was a move from peasant labour to wage labour, from subsistence to wage labour in order to buy the things you need and to sell yourself to a factory owner. That's what makes something capital from the point of view of a sociologist. So, if you like, a tractor, farmer drives, we use the term capital for that in colloquial sense and common everyday sense, but in sociology it's not really capital because he's using his own machine. It becomes capital in sociology because someone is paid to drive the machine, then the machine becomes capital. So we don't put the nature of the machine first, we put the nature of the social relationships first. It's probably a bit advanced, but I think it was worth flagging because we want to be critical of that technological determinist kind of view, so we don't want to reinforce it by just imagining that the mule or the machine is the basis for what makes a social system. So culture. Ideas, norms and values that apply in a given setting, and they'll be institutionalised usually in some form, more loosely or more strictly, often resisted, often challenged. One can challenge social norms and rules, but one can never be completely free of them. So where psychologists see choice and individual types making choices, and biologists see genes and hormones, we see social roles and culture. We don't try to look inside people or label them, we focus on their strengths. How is this apparent dysfunction in response to social conditions? How is this person doing their best to survive in a social setting? They may be making bad decisions, but we see that as a result of the social environment, not the result of genes or hormones. I mentioned earlier that we need to try to make our own culture seem strange. It's very easy to look at ethnographies of other cultures and see how, well, that's a strange custom or a strange belief compared with us. It's harder to look at our own culture and make it strange. So it's good to use anthropology to do that. And I took these examples from a book by Robbins, who talks about Navajo Indians and their healing rituals as a way of getting into the idea of culture. So the study of cultures is beliefs and behaviours and rules and the meanings that create the social order. Anthropologists for a long time have studied the ways that people have of creating a culture and a society. So here we have a picture of a Navajo shaman who's doing a sand painting ritual, and in the sand painting ritual what he's doing is painting all the aspects of a person's life, because illnesses seem to derive from a dislocation between where people should be in the social order and where they are in the social order. And the shaman's role is to tell the story and perform the ritual that return people to their proper place in the social order. And so when we look at these drawings, we can see there's a longhouse where the men live. There are horses, there are other animals that they are dependent on. There's bits of their story and their family tree, chants, and even relations to the spirit world and ancestors. And healing is about restoring the person to this, so that the person then comes in and is relocated in these. And that's an interesting way of thinking about healing and rituals in other cultures, but what we want to do is think about how it fits with a capitalist culture. We live in a capitalist culture. It's a consumer culture. So what would the key elements be in our sand paintings? What sort of things would you find in people's sand paintings in this culture? And who would perform the rituals and create the stories and retell them? It wouldn't be the elders or the shamans, so who would it be in our culture? As Robin says, how is the universe of the consumer, and indeed the consumer itself, created? And we've already shown how fantastically productive capitalism is, and the problem there is not so much to produce it as to sell it when it's that fantastically productive. And in the culture of last century, or the 1870s, the 19th century, the mass of people, the culture was one of self-denial and frugality. Good working people worked hard, they saved their money, they made do with simple items, basic household items, the tools they need. Most of them made their own clothes, they baked their own bread. They did all of those things as a matter of course, so it was a very frugal existence. But that's not going to help you sell a whole lot of stuff. So what were once luxuries have to become necessities. And these are the sorts of changes, and these are the sorts of things that would be in a sand picture of the big institutional changes that needed to happen. There had to be a revolution in marketing, in presentation and display. Shop windows were used just to store things in. It wasn't a display for you to come and peruse the goods. It was just a storage space. But the meaning of goods has to change. Until 1870, there were no brand names. There were no big department stores like we have now. Advertising was seen as something suspicious, like a P.T. Barnum as one born every minute, like a travelling sideshow with patent medicines. In the 80s, it was only $30 million it spent on advertising in the US, but by 2009 it was $300 billion. Fashion was invented. People had suddenly had to become up to date, so clothes ceased to be simply functional, but they had to be fashionable, new. Sales workers turned customers into guests of the firm, so people were invited in to purchase. There were big institutional changes. The university was retooled. There were no business studies a century ago. Now there are huge departments to teach marketing, business studies, retail, banking. All aspects of business and consumer culture are taught at universities and how to promote them. The governments had already supported production and society becoming more productive in economic growth, but increasingly after the turn of the century there was a Department of Commerce that did consumer research to find out what projects were marketable. Home ownership was encouraged. That meant new lines of credit, new loan instruments. People were encouraged to buy their own houses. And this becomes such a deeply embedded part of the culture, it's hard to even notice it because it just seems so normal to see brand names and advertising. But think of, and I think it was encapsulated in this statement by George Bush after September 11.
As we work with Congress in the coming year to chart a new course in Iraq and strengthen our military to meet the challenges of the 21st century, we must also work together to achieve important goals for the American people here at home. This work begins with keeping our economy growing. And I encourage you all to go shopping more.
Here in this enormous tragedy of September 11, this enormous attack on US soil, the whole apparatus after a few days went into you must go out and buy. You must go out and buy. That's how important consuming is to the way our system operates. As I said, we needed a transformation of values from thrift and modesty and hard work to leisure as a desirable goal, and spending, compulsive spending for its own sake. Commodities were marketed to bring love and respect. They were given human qualities. And instead of the citizen, an upright citizen, the consumer became the primary source of wealth. And I mentioned some of the big broader changes around time, space and class with modernity, but here we had another reconfiguration around consumer culture. Holidays were resisted by the dominant culture and by those in power as a waste of time, that people should be working. There'd be no sense in having extra holidays, so they were resisted. But now holidays have been spread out through the year, have been promoted as an opportunity for gift giving. People now have to give a card with gifts as well, so there's a massive market in gift cards and birthday cards. And Valentine's Day went from being, Valentine was a famous martyr, but he was retooled as the patron saint of love. The Mother's Day, Father's Day, all spread out conveniently through the year. Christmas, of course, being the classic one, is a key part of the myth making of the society, that this was a time not to celebrate the life of Jesus, or and what that represents, but as a time to purchase, to support the economy, to give gifts. True, but people value themselves by the gifts they got. Had the rise of home ownership, the rise of car ownership after the war. So that created suburbia and shopping malls. So the whole way suburbs, the inner city suburbs where working class people used to live, shifted out of the cities and further away, and because of the car people could travel to work, whereas prior to that, say here in Mackay, people rode to work. So you can see pictures of Mackay last century where with lots of bike racks. There was target marketing and breaking down into different groups, and the end of public spaces, the end of squares and places for public meetings and political action, because places where you could say sell a newspaper or make a speech were all privatised, and people went to malls instead of the town square. Everywhere you go, almost all public space has access to some kind of advertising. If you're driving through the countryside, there's billboards. If you go to a club, there's many televisions. It's almost impossible to escape television advertising or television in some form. And of course, once the market for adult sales was saturated, then you got more and more marketing. Now there's been some resistance to this, but to marketing to children. And we'll just have a quick look at this brief from excerpt from the Consuming Kids video, which is well worth a look.
Childhood culture has changed dramatically.
Kids, this is a toy you've got to have.
Look at the fun Debbie and Andy are having with these realistic ride-em toys.
Although it's true there was advertising to children back in the 1950s, the 1960s, even in the 70s, the amount of it was very confined in comparison to today.
You want to get a sling piece.
From the time children come into the world, everyone's trying to make them a consumer.
Kids are being marketed to through brand licensing, through product placement, through viral marketing in schools.
We're going to get new equipment and stuff, and McDonald's people are going to give us money.
There's DVDs, there's video games, there's the internet, there are iPods, there are cell phones where you can download video.
Watch videos, catch cast interviews, interact with a favorite Wildcat.
There's now ad for books, and there are ad for songs.
Not just ads, not just games, they're adver games.
Hotels are marketing to kids, and car companies are marketing to kids. Even airlines, are marketing to kids.
We're sending one lucky winner to Hawaii, courtesy of Hawaiian Airlines.
Kids have far more influence today, and it adds up to about $1 trillion every year. That's a big business.
What we have is the rise of 360-degree immersive marketing, where you try and get around the child at every aspect, at every avenue.
They go into supermarkets with them and film exactly how they look at a product, pick it up, put it back down, the way they move around a supermarket. They film them on the playground. They film them in school. They film them eating breakfast. They film them going into their closet and deciding what to wear.
What are the things that you need that aren't in here?
I need a lot of...
They film them talking to their friends. They organize little friendship circles and film what they're doing. They even follow them into the bathroom. It's creepy. It's just absolutely creepy.
Their goal is to insinuate their brands into the fabric of children's lives.
Can I help you?
Yeah, you see this?
Go ahead.
So the philosophy becomes cradle to grave. Let's get to them early. Let's get to them often. Let's get to them as many places as we can get them. And our goal is not just to sell them products and services, but to turn them into lifelong consumers.
Touch me, my Jimmy Choo flip-flops. Where is my pink Prada tote? I need my Tiffany hair.
we're creating a future generation of super consumers.
I want more.
That's the basic consumer identity. It's shallow, it's about me now, and it's about me and these things.
They're at the time in their life when they're forming kind of all their values and attitudes. They're in the formative stages.
Shit, I impress myself sometimes.
There's really a clear, very strong division between what boys learn and what girls learn. Boys are tough, strong, ready to fight.
Walk much?
And girls, they need to be pretty, sexy, and how they look determines their value. It objectifies both of them.
I mean, where did she find that outfit? Like Ugly Are Us? More like Ugly Are Her. We are so funny. And pretty. I love us.
We need, in a proactive, forward-looking way as a society to say, how is this changing us? How is this changing our environment? How is this changing our society? And do we want this?
We need to look at this as a systemic problem, look at this as a societal and a cultural problem, and say we need to protect children from corporate marketing.
We're the only industrialized country in the world that really doesn't have a policy about this. What does that mean for our future, for our well-being, and for their well-being?
1 in 3 children born in the year 2000 will develop diabetes.
Children and a high blood pressure.
Obesity.
Type 2 diabetes.
Antidepressants for children.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
ADHD. There is going to be a health care crisis, a concrete health care crisis.
Life expectancy of kids today will be shorter than that of their parents. The first such decline in modern times.
At what point should children and families take precedence over corporate profits?
We have become a country that places a lower priority on our children's emotional, cognitive, social, even spiritual development than it does on training them to be little consumers.
This is a lot more than about selling products and services. This is about the direction in which we are going as a culture, as a society, and as human beings.
So now think about institutions. Institutions are structures which govern behaviour within a certain community, its own norms and values. It could be a family, it could be a school, work, universities have their own culture. And that's an institution. The church is an institution. Even a gang, as we saw with Gang Leader for a Day. It has its own rules, its governed behaviour, its own values. They may be different. There'll be subcultures and so on, but there are institutions that form around these social norms. And so socialization is the way we learn the roles which embody the ideas, norms and values of an institution or a culture. It's not usually conscious, it's something we pick up. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple as we work through these institutions, but just to try to get you to think about them as agents of socialization. And we can go through a similar process as we did with the consumer with the worker. But we're just going to focus on the key institutions because I think you'll be able to connect that more easily with your assignment. So we use the sociological imagination just to reinforce that as a tool as well. So let's start with the sociological imagination and the family. Families are a key part of how societies work. They're the primary site, first site of socialization. They help to reproduce an system of authority and class location and a commitment to consumerism. They're a small mobile unit so they can move much more easily where the jobs are. They physically reproduce the future workforce for free instead of the boss having to think about where's that next generation of workers coming from. Women are doing that work at home for free, and it's regarded as a sort of safe haven, a haven away from the world. Family structures of course vary by race and class. Indigenous families are larger and have more children, for instance. But thinking about the history, has it always been like this? We feel as if families have always existed. That's what we're told. And certainly all societies must have a way of reproducing the next generation if they're going to survive. But that doesn't mean this institution we call the family is the same. In ancient Rome, the family was the household slaves. So the word family comes from familiara, which is all the slaves that belong to one person, which of course would include owning his own wife. Nuclear families are less than 3 lifetimes old. And before that, there were extended families and kin groups. So a family, when you talk about, tribal societies, families are a very different thing to the sort of privatised, within the household, non-productive, just a unit to consume, than was the case even 3 lifetimes ago. There are many structures of families, but the dominant cultural norm for us in the West is that there are 2 generations in the house usually. The mother and father are legally married, having a sexual relationship, and the children are the offspring of those 2 parents, and the children are dependent on them. That's what we're told is normal family situation. Now, of course, that's changing a little bit. Often, more and more women work these days than the traditional nuclear family, but to a large extent that captures the idea of a nuclear family as the norm. In fact, only 58% of Australians live in that kind of nuclear family arrangement. 58.6% of families do not live in that sort of nuclear family arrangement, and yet we're told that it's normal. So thinking about the culture, what ideas are in the culture around families? Well, as I said, they're viewed as a safe haven, a private sphere, and even though we've talked about private troubles and public issues, we can see that in the private sphere there are a different set of norms. Housework's unpaid, but if you got someone in to do that work, you'd have to pay them. But women do that work at home for free. If you had to pay, if men had to pay for cooking, cleaning and bottle washing and child minding, it would be a huge impost on families to have to pay for that. So the woman does it at home for free. Domestic violence seems different to public violence. This has been challenged, of course, but to a very large extent, if I punch someone on the street out the front of my house, that's regarded as very differently if I punch my intimate partner. Child sexual exploitation is seen as wrong at home. Actually, we have this thing about incest, and children are supposed to be protected from that sort of pedophile activity. But we don't see it necessarily the same with, say, going to Asia and having sex with a young girl who's underage. And there are sex tourism that's promoted specifically around that. That's in the public sphere, so that's regarded as different. Often the family, especially the nuclear family, is seen as being in decline, and because it's the cultural norm, that itself is seen as a source of social problems. And we need to think about whether the family really is a safe haven or not. That's another piece of the mythology that we should challenge. There are over 80,000 reported cases of child abuse a year. Home is the most dangerous place for women and children. It's the most common place for murder and assault. It's 20 to 33% of marriage have physical violence, and we're not talking about emotional, social forms of violence, controlling behaviours and so on. And that experience of violence is gendered. If a man experiences violence, and men in the public sphere experience more violence than women do in the public sphere, and overall, about 4 times as much. But the violence they experience will be from a stranger in a pub. Women are much more likely to experience the violence from someone they are intimate with. And so it's a very different experience of violence. It's estimated that 15% of girls experience incest from a father or a male relative, or sexual assault by family friends. So that's one institution, one set of institutions. In the next part we'll look at education and work as institutions.